Just checking that people can hear me before we get started in a few minutes.
Good afternoon. Can I have a sound check, please? Whoever's there listening.
We can hear you.
Cool. How's you, Ross?
Not too bad, Peter. Ready for this?
Is it as wet over at Durham as it is here in concert?
Oh, it's pretty miserable.
Yeah, I've just done a blooming 50-metre dash from the bus stop round to home.
Well, you're only sounding marginally out of breath.
Well, that's only because I packed in smoking. the fitness still leaves a lot to be desired. Is Brian there? No?
Not yet.
I don't see Brian. I do see Mr. Kelly with no audio.
I think Brian's internet's still playing up, so I don't think he'll be on.
Right, okay. Right, bear with me. I
think David was going to do an introduction, but I think he's going to give people a few more minutes.
Yeah, I've got it, Dave. If you just want to keep an eye on the Q&A till we get the intros done, mate. That's all good. That's it. I'm assuming you're doing recording.
I think that Asset was going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep, fantastic. Okay, let's just give it a few more minutes. Let me get my breath back. Right, 2 seconds. Right, let's kick off. Okay. Good evening, good morning, good night even, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another LIDNUG presentation. This evening here live from the UK we have Ross Dargan, who's a well-known celebrity-ish on the UK development circuit. He's presented at quite a few of the UK tech events. And he's now going to impart some of his wisdom for us on cross-mobile development in C#. Now, we don't actually have a normal set of LIDNUG slides, I apologise. So I'm just going to try and remember what I can. If you want to find out what our next events are, you can find them on our Eventbrite page at lidnugevents.eventbrite.com. Obviously, there's the LIDNUG group in LinkedIn if you want to come along and pay us a visit. And before I hand over to Ross to take the helm, I would just like to congratulate Ross on the birth of his new baby son. We did have some details put in the slides, which I think Brian put together, but which I don't have, so we can't put it up and make it all official and everything. I apologise for that. But I hope you're a happy daddy, Ross, and take it away and enlighten us.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and yeah, very happy daddy, a little bit tired, but very happy. So my name is Ross Dargan. I work for a company called Waterstones in the UK, and I head up our mobile offering. So today I'm going to talk to you about cross-platform mobile development in C#, but I'm mainly going to focus on the architecture of cross-platform mobile development with an emphasis in C#. Now, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask them as we go along using the Q&A options inside Live Meeting. Free to use the feedback tab. I know I have a tendency to go a little bit fast, so I will try and keep an eye on that and slow down if people request that. Okay, let's dive in. So it's always good to set expectations at the start, so I'll explain what I'm going to cover. I'm going to show you how to target 95% of the UK market in C#, with a maximum of code reuse, because that's really important. If you copy and paste code, things are going to go wrong. You're going to copy and paste bugs and errors, and that's not going to lead to happy times. But what I won't be covering is I'm not going to show you other cross-platform options. So I'm not going to show you how to use PhoneGap or Titanium or some of the other options that are out there. I'm going to be focusing very much on Xamarin and their tooling. That seems to be all the rage at the minute. But what I can recommend is this Property Cross website. If you visit that website, you can see one project that's been written in up to, I don't know how many they're up to now, 15, 16 different toolkits. One of them is Xamarin, and I've written a version using a technique that I'm going to show you at the end, which you will be able to see on there. It's just the pull request has been approved as we speak. The other thing that I'm not going to cover, I'm not going to give you a full walkthrough of the Xamarin tooling. So whilst I will show you how to architect a solution well, I'm not going to show you all the ins and outs of the Xamarin tooling, because it's a very big product, and that's not the aim of this talk. And the final thing that I'm not going to cover is BlackBerry. I'm really sorry, but Xamarin does not cover BlackBerry, so that isn't going to be covered. Sorry about that for the one or two people that use it. So this is how the UK smartphone landscape looks at the minute. Now, actually, this is a couple of months out of date now, and the BlackBerry piece of the pie there has shrunk even further. This does vary across the world, so wherever you're from, you need to be sure that the techniques that I'm going to show you are appropriate, and C# is the right tooling, the right language for you to take advantage of the Xamarin tooling. In America, the iOS percentage is higher, the Windows percentage is lower, Windows Phone, and Android is bigger. But anyway, it's worth checking who your customers are, what devices they're using, and making sure that you're targeting them correctly. Again, sorry BlackBerry. So if you were going to target the three major platforms that I've discussed using native development, this is just an overview for people that aren't familiar with necessarily the tools and techniques. Using Android, you'd have to program in Java, and you'd use Eclipse or IntelliJ as the IDE there. For Windows Phone, you would use C# or Visual Basic or F# inside Visual Studio. I'm assuming everyone here, because it had C# in the title, is quite used to using Visual Studio. If not, good luck. iOS, you'd use Objective-C and Xcode, which is interesting if you've ever done any native iOS development. I find them tools interesting. So I'm certainly more comfortable in Java. So what I'm going to use is Xamarin. So what Xamarin lets you do is, rather than having to write three different native platforms using three different tools, you can write just in C#, and basically what it does is it provides a very low-level abstraction on top of the native sort of tools. So that has its own advantages and disadvantages. Using something like PhoneGap or something like you're writing HTML, and when you make something visible, you just use CSS or JavaScript to do it. With Xamarin, you actually have to know the Objective-C or the Android keywords to do it. So you have to set is visible to false if you want to hide something in Objective-C, and in Android you need to use a visibility property. You have to understand these properties and look them up. But the advantage of that is you have full native APIs. They don't hide anything away from you with a high-level abstraction. You've got access to everything. So it's got its pros and cons for different users. I prefer that because it means that you end up with basically a compiled native application that can fully take advantage of the platform. Basically, Xamarin will take the C# you write and it will turn it into a compiled native application. It will just sort of translate the C# that you've written into the native language, and that gives you many benefits. Yeah, okay. So what's the bad about it? Okay, well, it costs $2,000 per developer per year. That's to target Android and iPhone. Depending on your situation, that might be a deal breaker. Personally, as a consultant, it easily saves me the amount of time that price would cost in a project, so I can justify the price quite comfortably. If you're inside an IT department, you might struggle with that, but it depends on your situation. I think somebody needs to mute the microphone, maybe. Sorry about that. You still need a Mac. Part of the rules of iPhone development is that you must compile the application natively on a Mac, so that still has to happen. But you can write once and run everywhere, but you've got to test on devices. You can't just hope that it works, it compiles. The tooling is still a little bit immature on Xamarin. It changes quite rapidly. They've got very rapid cadence on stuff, but it does mean that things can crash often with new versions, so you need to be a little bit wary of that. But the support is excellent and they're very, very helpful. And you need to write each UI separately. So if you're using something like PhoneGap, you can write one UI and it will run on each device and it will look the same. With Xamarin, you're going to have to write each UI separately. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. If I take the Amazon application, this is what it looks like on an iPhone. We can see this is iOS 6, so it's not got that flat kind of Windows Phone-ish look about it. But we've got the tab bar at the bottom, we've got the search, and it looks like an iPhone application. This is the Android version. Notice the tab bar's gone, and things flow a little bit differently. And on the Windows Phone version, it is completely different. We've got the panorama control that you can see sort of here. And the applications look and feel native. Now, with Xamarin, you can achieve that kind of look and feel. If you're using something like PhoneGap, you're going to really struggle to get that different but native-looking feel. So I don't think it's a bad thing that you have to write each application. Sorry, you have to create each UI layer separately, but it's something worth bearing in mind. Okay, so I'm going to switch now and do a little Hello World demo so that you can see what the experience is like for creating a new project. So if I go to File, New Project, I'll create an Android application first. Just get rid of that. There we go. What this will do for me is it will create a little template, which is just like a Hello World project. This is all C#. Now, this is quite similar to native Java. On the onCreate event, what we'll do is we'll find a control. So we're going to find the button control with the ID My Button, and we're going to attach a click event to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the text to equal how many times it's been clicked. And that's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this. Now, if you're doing development using Xamarin, I'd highly recommend using Genymotion. It's only free for personal use. You've got to pay for it if you're going to use it for a client project. But it is far, far quicker than the native sort of emulator that's available. And as you can see, I can click that and it's registering the clicks. And if I put a breakpoint in here, and I press it, we'll see the breakpoint is hit, and we can get the IntelliSense that we used to, and we can do whatever we want there. So it's a very, very familiar experience to Visual Studio users that are used to debugging in that way. But there is our native Android application. So I'm going to add a new project now, and I'll add an iOS one, and I'll just do an iPhone application. We'll call it empty project. And oh no, I shouldn't have done empty, I should have done the hello world one, otherwise try cope. There we go. Okay, let me just set this as a startup. And one thing that you sometimes have to do to just get this to work straight off the bat is set some properties in the IPA, sorry, not the IPA, the iOS application. So just give it a name, we'll call it test, and we'll give it a, oops, where's it gone? A version, hopefully that'll run now. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to turn this to, sorry, not ad hoc, goodness me, debug, and let me change the platform to be the iPhone simulator. And let's run this, and let's, fingers crossed, no, it wants an identifier, so I'm going to call this test.waterstones.com. Sorry, com.waterstones.test. There we are, and let me run that, and hopefully we should see this deploy. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to copy the code over to the Mac and do the compilation of it. And what we should see here is the iOS simulator starting up with the click button. Now, I'm using VNC so you can see what's on my Mac, because obviously I'm doing this on a Windows machine. And if I click the button, we can see it doing exactly the same as it was doing on the Android. And again, this supports the debugging as we were seeing before on the Android application. So if I go into my view controller and I put a breakpoint here, and hopefully when I click it, you'll see Visual Studio has stopped, and we've got the breakpoint has been hit, and we can see the number of clicks exactly the same as we could in Android. So let me just close this down. Go back to the presentation. Where's it going? It's dropped me out, hasn't it? What? Oh, has it dropped me out?
You're looking okay from here, Ross?
I can't see. I can't see it, so I can't switch my display because I can't see a window.
Well, we can see
okay, here we go.
Grey Motion Galaxy Nexus thing.
There we go. Hopefully it'll switch back to the PowerPoint. Has that switched back now?
Yes, we can see your PowerPoint.
Brilliant. Sorry about that. What confused me is it removed it from the taskbar and it put it at the top there, so I couldn't control it.
Yes, it does that sometimes. Are we good to continue? No, apparently not. I think we seem to have lost Ross. Ross, are you still with us? Okay, folks, sorry about that. I think we seem to have lost Ross for a moment. Let's just see if I can get him back. We can still see his slides, but we can't hear or see him. Just bear with me. Dave, are you still there, mate? Please tell me you are. Sorry about this, folks. We'll have Ross back just as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, there you are. You're back.
I am sorry about that. Did you see the slides before I switched over? Could you hear me there?
Yeah, we saw the slides, and then it was just after you put the first slide that you disappeared.
Okay, so I will recap the slides when I switch back, but to save me switching back to them and then come back to this, I'll tell you what they were talking about. What I'm going to show is 4 versions of the same project that show how to do code sharing using different techniques. And the first technique that I'm going to do is just absolutely no code sharing at all, just copying and pasting code. Now, I haven't used mobile applications for this. I'm going to use a WPF application and a Windows 8 Metro application. And the reason being is that the platforms are very different. You can't copy and paste the same code. So it shows you the same principles that we would use for mobile, but it basically means I don't have to use the Xamarin tooling, which means it's a little bit quicker for demos. So what we've got is we've got 2 applications that do the same thing. So I will run the applications first, and I'll show you how they do it. So the first one I'm going to run is the store application. And what we can see is we've got 2 text boxes for a title and a body, and a show message box that will pop up a message box. What it does is it uppercase is the title, and it just shows the body in lowercase. So let me do that, and let me switch back to the desktop now, and let me do the same for the WPF app. I'll show you that one running. And as you would imagine, this is going to do something very similar as a WPF application. So we've got a title, we've got a body, and we've got a show message. Okay. If we have a look at the core code for both, you can see we've got a message service in there. So the message service for the WPF application, what this does is it takes in a title and it takes in a body, and it, as I said, it will uppercase it. But notice that it also trims the length of the body to 50 characters, and it'll put ... in. If you go above that, and we use the message box.show, which is the WPF way of showing messages. If I have a look at the store version, we use message dialog, which is the Windows Store version way of showing message boxes. But if you notice that this code here is identical to the WPF version, it's exactly the same code. So I basically copied and pasted that code. Now the problem with doing that is, let's say we change the business logic and we decide that actually 10 characters is what we want to start trimming at, or we don't want to uppercase the title anymore. Well, I've now got to change that in 2 places. I've got to change it in the WPF application, and I've also got to change it in the store application. And that's not great. That's not what we want to do. So let's have a look at how we can use file linking to resolve that problem. So in file linking, we have our store application. That, again, is exactly the same as the WPF application. We've got our main page, .cs. We have our button click event where we create our message service and we ask it to show message. And in WPF, we do exactly the same. We have our button click event and we create our message service and we ask it to show message. But what we can start to do now is we can start to do some cleverer things in the core libraries. So if you see here, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a tiny blue arrow over that message service.cs. What that's saying is that this is just a link to a file. It's not actually a solid file on the hard drive. But if we have a look inside it, we can see that we've got this code here, show message, and then down here we've got these compiler directives. And what we're saying is that if this file is being used in the WPF application, use this code. If it's not being used in the WPF application, then use this code. So if I close this down and I open it up in the core application, you see a different part is highlighted. Now what this means is that I can change the max size to 10 in this file here and save it, and then close it. And then if I open it up here, you can see it's been changed to 10 as well. So I changed it in the WPF core version, and it's updated it in the store version. So if I start this project up and we have a look at the store application now, then what we should see is when I show the message, we've got a ... after 10 characters. And if I do the same with the WPF version, then that business logic should have been copied over. I know this is a very contrived example, but I've seen dafter business logic than that, so hopefully that works. So I'm going to go back to the slide now. Hopefully you won't lose my audio. We will see. There we are. And let me just pop back one so you can see how we do file linking. So you can see that when you're adding a file, what you do is you click the add as link, or you use this little drop down here to select add as link, and then when it gets added in the project, it'll have that little blue highlight, and you use compiler directives. Oops, sorry, I'm switching about a bit too quickly there. You use the compiler directives to specify which bit of code you want to use in which project. So that's file linking done. Now the pros of that is it's very quick. It's very, very simple to do that. But some of the disadvantages are you end up with very messy code. So you can imagine for each platform, additional platform that you add, you have to have another if-else. And it's also gets progressively more difficult to maintain that. And it's very hard to test that code. You couldn't write a unit test for just one of them. You'd have to write it in both languages. It's not just normal C#. So it's not the best way of doing it. And also, it's very easy to forget to add a file to each project. So you need to be quite careful with that. Now, I'm just getting a message that tells me my audio or video might have stopped. So can I just have a quick check that people can hear me?
Yep, you're still audible.
Still audible, that's fine. Just a few people had blue on, which means they can't hear me and it's giving me a warning, but that's fine. People can hear me, that's good. Alright then, let's move on then. So portable class libraries is the next option of doing it. Now normally I would ask people whether they have heard of portable class libraries before, but given that I can't really do that here, I'm going to assume that some of you have and some of you haven't. So portable class libraries was added in Visual Studio a few versions ago. And basically what it lets you do is when you add it to a project, you specify which frameworks this class library is going to be used in. And what it will do is it will prevent you from using any sort of keywords or any parts of the language that aren't supported by the total, by the set of frameworks that you've selected. So you won't be able to use any keywords that aren't supported by everything. So it basically supports the lowest common denominator. So this is great, but you still need to do the platform-specific code. You still need to have some way of showing the message box, for example. So one way of achieving this is to use abstract classes. So what we would do is we would define an abstract class that basically has this abstract method that's not implemented called sendMessage. And what we do is we call the sendMessage inside our core kind of business logic code, and we pass in the title and body, but we don't worry about the implementation of this in the portable class library. And then inside the we create a concrete implementation of message service, which does actually have the implementation of sendMessage, and we do this inside the platform-specific project. So this would be the sort of message dialog as the store version, and this would be the WPF version. So let me switch back to a demo, and again, hopefully I won't lose the audio.
Don't worry, we're watching this time.
Good news.
But I've got your messages and your Twitter and what have you, and I'll let you know if anything goes wrong.
That's good to hear. Cheers, Peter. So what we have here is we have a core project. So before in file linking, we had a core project that was used for the store app and a core project that was used for the WPF app. So we had 4 project files. But now that we're using portable class libraries, we only need one core project. And if I have a look at the properties of that, then what you can see is that it targets Windows Store app and it targets the Windows Phone, which means that it can be referenced. Sorry, not Windows Phone. That's not store what I meant. It targets the .NET Framework 4.5, which is what the WPF project uses, and it targets the Windows Store apps, which is what the Store project uses. Which means that both of these projects can reference that core file, which is something that you couldn't do without using the portable class library. Now, if we have a look at the core project, we can see we've got this message service base. This is an abstract class, so it can't be constructed directly, and we have an abstract method that we need to implement whenever we create a concrete implementation of this called sendMessage. Now, if we have a look at the Store app now, in message service, this implements message service base, and all we're doing here is we put the platform-specific code for displaying a message. And if we have a look at the main page.cs, on the button click, what we do is we create a message service base using the concrete implementation of message service, and we call it exactly as we did before. And in the WPF application, we do exactly the same. We implement message service, and we provide the platform-specific implementation of sendMessage, and then in the CS file, all we do is we create that implementation of it. So what I can do now is I can go to my message service base and I can decide that actually uppercasing stuff no longer needs to be done. It's not the 80s, and that should work. So if I run the Store application, sure, we can see it's not uppercased anymore. And now if I do the same on the WPF application, I've changed this to one place. Remember, that's the key bit about all this. Perhaps if I stop the application. There we go, we see it hasn't uppercased it. So, I know I went through that pretty quick. All this code is going to be available at the end in case you want to have a little look through it. But you can see that the portable class library means that I only have this core business logic in one place now, and I have the platform-specific code in a different place. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so we've got a question from someone asking, do I need to install anything special to be able to target more than the .NET frameworks? That's a great question. So if you're targeting, let me just bring up, you won't be able to see it, but I will tell you, actually I'll show you what's on there. Let me just switch to my desktop. So this shows you the target frameworks that are available. So .NET 4.5 and Silverlight 4 are available on the most recent version of Visual Studio, and Windows Store app is available on 2012 and 2013 if you're developing on a Windows 8 device. Windows Phone 7 and higher is there because I've installed the Windows Phone SDK. Xbox 360 is there by default, although it's very, very restrictive. You're not going to get a lot of code sharing with that. Xamarin.Android and Xamarin.iOS get installed with the Xamarin tooling. Monotouch, Mono for Android and Monotouch are no longer used. This was a way of being able to use portable class libraries before Xamarin supported it. Recently, they've added proper full support for it, so you would no longer have to hack about with the portable class libraries to add these in. So basically, the portable class libraries get added for each platform that you've got an SDK installed for. So let me switch back to the presentation. Okay. So what are the pros and cons of using the abstract class method that I've just shown you? Well, the pros are, again, it's pretty quick to do it. We're not having to do a lot of effort, and we get the benefits that we're after. Far, far easier to maintain. And it follows the open-close principle, which if you're a fan of the design patterns and the sort of principles that are out there, then that will appeal to you, and it should appeal to you. But some of the cons are it's still quite difficult to test it. We can't test the abstract class without creating a concrete implementation of it. So it's a little bit awkward to test that business logic without producing a specific implementation. And it's still pretty inflexible. If you want to show a message box in a different project, then you can't reuse the message box showing code that you've got. So another alternative approach is to use something called dependency injection. Now hopefully this is something that most people are familiar with, but I will take you through this. So when you do dependency injection, what it helps you do is it helps separate your code. So you really try to adopt a single responsibility pattern. So each class file really should do just one thing. So this allows you to unit test very discrete parts of the implementation. You end up with no giant sort of God class. And you then inject in platform-specific pieces of code. Inversion of control is something that you will hear often with dependency injection. Basically, that just allows you to swap implementations really easily. So let me give you a demo of the portable class library options. Switch back over to my desktop. So again, with dependency injection, we are using portable class libraries for the core library. But we've now got a few more options. With dependency injection, you heavily write against interfaces. You try to use interfaces for everything. So if we have a look at the store application, we'll look at the store application first. Then what we can see is in our main page, the constructor for main page takes in something called an iMessage service. So if we have a look at iMessage service, then iMessage service is something that provides the ability to show a message. With dependency injection, you try to avoid using the new keyword as much as possible, and you pass in objects that your UI needs to use. You don't construct them in the page, and that lets you sort of create a unit test for this page, and you can do things like ensure that that's being called at the right time. So when the button is clicked, all we do is we take the message service and we pass in show message. Now, I'm not using proper inversion of control in the store application, although it's perfectly possible. I've just not done it here. I've just got a default constructor that creates up a new message service. And if we have a look at the message service, what this does is, again, we've got our business logic, and we call this field message box service. If we have a look at that, that's set in the constructor. Again, we pass in something called an iMessage box service. Now, what iMessage box service does is this is the thing that's capable of displaying the message box on whichever platform we're in. So we're basically saying that I can create a message service as long as you give me something that's capable of showing message boxes. And this is where the business logic is contained. Now, if we have a look at the store, we now have a message box service that implements that interface. And this takes a title and a body and doesn't do any of the business logic. All it does is shows a message box. And it's the same in the WPF app, except this time we use messagebox.show. So what I can do now is I will change the rules a little bit. So we'll go from 50 to 5. So we're really not going to show much. And if I start the store app, we're going to have an error. Oh dear. Okay, I've got a little issue with this. I'm going to try one thing that might fix it, and if it doesn't, I'm going to move on from the demo because you pretty much know what it's going to do. It is going to simply show the message box. Let me just try.
What's the irony here, Ross?
What's that?
The irony is that your demo fell over in exactly the same place it did.
I think it probably did, and I didn't check it. How silly of me. Okay, so it's not working. I don't know why I've added in Unity in there, because I'm not using dependency injection. So let me try just getting rid of that and see if that now works. Aha, it does. There we go, fancy that. Okay, so now if I click show message, we just have 5 characters displayed, and this is my title. Brilliant. and let's have a little look at the WPF version. So the WPF version is a little bit simpler. If we have a look at the main window here, I don't have to have a default constructor here. I simply say that to create a main window, I'd require this dependency. And when you click the button, I'm going to use that dependency to show a message. So the way this works is because somehow WPF, the .NET framework, needs to know how to construct one of these. What it does is it uses an inversion of control container, basically this Unity container, to basically map interfaces to concrete implementations. So I'm using Unity here, which is just one of many different options that you've got out there. But what I'm saying is that if in this application I ask for a message box service, I want you to give me one of them. And if I ask for a message service, I want you to give me one of them. And what I would like you to do is construct a main window for me. So what it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, you want a main window, I can give you one of them. And then it goes, okay, well, to give me one of them, to give you a main window, I need to construct one of these things. And it'll go, okay, well, to construct an iMessage service, I give you a message service, which is the core application, part of the core application. And it goes, to give you a message service, I need to give you a message box service. And it knows how to create one of them. So it'll go and new up a message box service for you. And that's it. It's completed the dependency tree. It's managed to new up all the references that you need. And it's kind of, as magic, it's constructed everything that you need. And then inside our main window, we just call show message, which is what we've done in the store app. So if I start this application, then it's going to run exactly the same as it did in the store application. And we've cut off to 3. So I know that was a bit quick, but hopefully that gave you a brief taste of what dependency injection is and what benefits it can bring. So let me pop back to the slides now, and I'll do the pros and cons for dependency injection. So what are the pros? Well, very loosely coupled code, which basically means that you can swap and change implementations. We haven't got hard dependencies on things. Unit tests are really easy now because we can just pass in a faked up way of showing messages, and we can test our business logic to make sure it's going to pass in the right text. So we can do some really cool stuff there. We've got single responsibility now, which basically means that each CS file is just doing one thing. And we have open-closed principles, which means that to modify the way we are showing message boxes, we don't have to change any other code, which is a really good thing. So, oops, let's just do it. There we go. So what are the cons? Oops, sorry, that's completely... It's only showing 1 bullet point for me, but hopefully you can see 3 bullet points with nothing next to them. It was a joke. Basically, I don't... It's very easy to come up with the pros, but the cons are a little bit harder to come up with. So what I did was I went to my favorite search engine, and I asked what are the downsides to dependency injection. And you can search this yourself, and you'll find that the very first answer is the Stack Overflow answer, which is obvious. So I went on to Stack Overflow, and I pulled out what the guy had said. And the answer that he gave, the most upvoted answer, is that it can be very dangerous for your career because you can end up with loosely coupled code, and it may turn out that you have to decline tons of job offers because people want people that can do this. So Mark Siemens' answer was obviously a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but quite funny. So really, what are the cons? Okay, well, some of the cons are you have to write more code. We had to write 2 interfaces and 2 services, so you've got to do a little bit more work. You end up with quite bloated constructors sometimes. You can end up with a constructor that maybe takes on 3 or 4 services, whereas before you would just write new, blah, 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 blah. But personally, I think for the advantages that you get, that's no bad thing. You just need to be a little bit more careful. Okay, so that's dependency injection. So can we squeeze any more reuse out? Is there anything else that we can do to try and reduce how much code we're having to type? Well, one thing that we can use is a design pattern called MVVM. Now, MVVM is a way of maximizing UI code reuse. So let me quickly show you what MVVM is. So what you end up with is some platform-specific code, which would be for your view. This is the way of displaying information. There should be no logic here, but so this is kind of like the buttons that you would have in iOS or the screens that you have in Android. It would be a resource file. It's basically the way of displaying stuff. And what you do is, through the use of data bindings and commands, you bind the view to a view model. So basically what you say is that the button there should get its text from this property on the view model, and when it's clicked it should fire this event on the view model. And the view model then is responsible for updating the model and saving it to the database and doing things like that. So you end up with this very loosely coupled sort of disconnect between a view and a view model, and the view model should be reusable on different platforms. So you would use your view model on Android, iOS, and on Windows Phone. It would be the same view model, but you just have a different view for each platform. So let me show you that. Now what I will say is that I'm about to show you hopefully 5 or 6 different UIs for the same project. There is a reasonable chance that one of them is not going to work, so bear with me. Let me switch back over. I did get a quick question from someone about Telerik, but I'm going to answer that at the end because it's a little bit disconnected from what we're talking about at the minute. Okay, so I'm going to open a little project that I've got up. And I've called this project Facts. And what we've got is we've got a core project. Now this is where our view model is. And we've got our first view model here. And what we do is we take in a fact service, which is something that is able to produce facts basically. And what we have is we have a property called fact, which is the fact that we have selected. And we have a command which is pick the next fact. And what I do is I set the next fact command to this event, to this method. So whenever that command is executed, what we do is we go to our fact service, we get a random fact, and we set the fact property to the fact that we've selected. Okay, so that's basically what we're doing. Now, again, this is using dependency injection. You see we've injected the fact service. And if I have a look at my domain, we can see that this is the fact service. And all it does is it has a method on called getRandomFact. It's using async code so that we can not lock the UI. That's really important on mobile applications. And if we have a look at the actual implementation of fact service, then what you can see is that we pass in a repository, which is something you can use to get facts, and we return another. This isn't doing anything clever, and it makes it a bit pointless, but what you could start doing here is you could implement caching, you could implement all sorts in here to make sure that you're not you're basically doing your business logic in here. And if we have a look at the repository, all our fact repository does is very similar service. It returns a fact, and a fact has a property on it called a fact. Now, if we have a look in repository, we've got 2 implementations of it. Now, the reason we've got 2 implementations of it is one is a bit of a cheat implementation that doesn't go off to the internet. It's just got a static list that I randomly pick from, and one does go to the internet, and it uses an HTTP client. Now, this is using the international Chuck Norris database to get facts out, and I got into a bit of trouble using this in a demo because some of them are a little bit risky. So I'm not going to use this one. I'll use the clean one, which is the JS fact repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the very first implementation of it, which is a console application, and you'll see this references the domain, the repository, and if I open up the program, all I do is I new up a fact service, and I keep on looping around them until I get a fact. This isn't using the view model because it's just a console application. It's just to show kind of what the application does. So if I run this, what we'll see, hopefully, is actually which I think that one might still be going out to the internet. Let's have a little look. Yes, it is. Oops. There we go. Okay, let me do that again. Why is that not happy? Oh, silly resharper. Okay, let me do that again then. There we go. So all that this is going to do is it's going to keep on pulling out facts until I end. And obviously it's got to be John Skeet facts, because the guy is a legend. Okay, so that I'm going to count as UI or platform number 1, console app. Why not? So what I'm going to do for platform number 2 is I will do the WPF application. So what we've got in our WPF application is this is starting to use the MVVM components. So what I'll do is I'll have a little look at the view. And what we can see here is that we have a, hopefully people have used XAML, but if not, I'm hoping it makes sense. A stack panel is just kind of a way of grouping some content together. What we've got in it is we've got a button, and what we're saying is whenever this button is pressed, I want you to execute the next fact command, which if you remember, if I go to the view model, was an I command thing. So whenever anybody presses that button, execute that command. And what I want you to do is I want you to have a text box, and I want you to take the property fact from the view model and just put it on here. Now I've got 2 ways, but actually that can just be 1 way because we're never going to update it. So let me execute this. And what we can see is anytime we press the button, it is executing, it's getting a new command from the service and it's displaying it on the screen. Now then, what I want to show you is that inside the CS file, there is absolutely no code behind. There is nothing. Inside the view, what we've done is we have said that but basically we put all the logic for where it should be getting data from inside here. And it's using convention to figure out which view model it should use. So it knows that the view is called firstView.xaml, and it's using convention to figure out that, well, actually the view model that should be attaching to comes from the core project first view model. So it knows that you use first view, it should be bound to first view model. Just so people know, because there's probably going to be a few questions about this, this is using something called MVVM cross, which is a very, very flexible way to share view models across a lot of different platforms. Let me have a look at the Windows Phone 8 application now. Now here the view is again using XAML, so it's very, very similar to the WPF application. If I scroll down, you'll see that we've got our button here, our stack panel button. Let me just switch these around and get rid of that. We've got our command bound to next fact command, exactly the same as the WPF application, and we've got our text box bound to fact. So if I run, I'll show you the code behind, just to show you there's no cheating on this one either. We've got no code behind. So basically the only platform specific code we've had to write is this view here. None of the rest of this code is platform specific. It's all just generated for me. I haven't had to type any of it. And it's the same with the WPF application. I didn't have to type any of that. So if I start this application, we can see we've got the next fact. That's all coming live. That's great. So let me stop that. So that's platform number 3. Let's go for platform number 4. Again, this is the modern UI, not called Metro. It's a store application. If I go to the view, what we can see is, is that a different way? We've again got a button, our text box, we're bound exactly the same way as WPF and Windows Phone. And I can start, and I'll show you the code behind just to prove that I'm not cheating. No code behind, it's doing all the binding as you'd expect. Let me start this application. Okay. Don't know why. Alright, well, I don't know what that was, but it's still working. Let me switch back. Let me just check the question and answers, because there's quite a few coming through now. Can you open a solution in Xamarin Studio? Okay, I will answer all them later on. Let me do the Android application. So let me set that as a startup project. I'm going to put this on ARM, make sure, no, not ARM, any CPU, make sure Genymotion is selected. And let me show you this first of all. So again, we've got our views folder. Now anyone that's in Android development should be used to activities. This is a special type of activity called MVX activity. This is the code behind. None of this is just pretty much copy and paste. There isn't any sort of anything in here to do with pulling out a fact or anything like that. If I have a look at the layout resource file, this uses AXML, which is just a type of XML. It's very, very similar to XAML. It's just a way of laying out code. If I look at the source, you can see we have a button here. We've got this, which is a little bit different, but basically all we're saying is that you bind this button again to the next fact command. We've got a text view, and we see you take that from the fact property on it. You set the text. So there is no code behind for this. This is exactly the same as the other platforms. And if I debug this and start this, open up Genymotion, and if we cross our fingers, what platform are we up to now? Is this platform number 4 or 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Platform number 5. Fingers crossed. Starting up, and there we go. So if I press next fact, we can see that it's loading the same service, same code. Absolutely no platform-specific code in this yet, and it's all working fine. So let me switch to the last platform that I'm going to do now, iOS. And this is where things get a little bit different here. So you can use something called a nib, which is basically like a drag-and-drop way of writing interfaces. The way a lot of things are done is in sort of the Xamarin world, at least in the minute, is they use they basically design a UI layout programmatically. This is just done to make things simple. If I was to use a nib editor or something like that, I would have to switch over to the Mac to define the layout. But if you ignore all of this, because all this is doing is defining if you ignore all of this, all this is doing is defining the layout. So it's basically we're going to add a label and a button, and this is what the text is going to be. It's this code here that is doing the binding. Now, iOS does not support bindings by modifying sort of the view the way that you do in every other platform by modifying XML. What you do is you programmatically have to define it. So what you have to say is we're going to create a binding set between this view and this view model. And what I want you to do is I want you to bind the label to the view model's fact property, and I want you to bind the next fact button to the next fact command. Okay, so it's very, very similar, but it looks like there's more code, but there's actually not. That's the only platform-specific code that we were doing, and if you think in the other platforms, we were still doing something like this, but we were just defining it in the in the XML layout. So let me start this up and show that this works. And again, I'm going to have to switch back over to the Mac to show this. And if everything goes well, the iOS simulation starts off. Now, I've been using simulators for everything, but this works perfectly fine if you've got a mobile plugged in. But if I was to do that, you would just have to take my word that it works, because I'm not going to point a webcam at it, because that would be a horrific experience. So if I click next fact, obviously pick the same fact, we can see that that's working just fine. Okay, let me have a quick look at the question and answers again. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to answer the rest of the question and answers at the end now, just because we are nearly finished the talk, so I can just zip through the question and answers. So none of them failed. I managed to show you, was it 6 platforms? There was a console app, which I am counting. There was an iPhone app, an Android app, a modern store app, a Windows Phone 8 app, and a WPF app, all using the same code for sort of randomly selecting a fact and for displaying it, and just only the view bit was different for each platform. So it's very, very powerful. So the way that I've improved code reuse here is 3 easy ways. Heavy usage dependency injection really allows you to reuse a lot of code. The use of portable class libraries is a great way of sort of linking files, reusing code across different classes, and the use of view models to reuse as much of the presentation code as you can. So, 3 layers of win here. Layer number 1 is Visual Studio. I don't care. I personally believe that Visual Studio is by far the best IDE that is out there. I think it is brilliant. The middle layer is Xamarin. The Xamarin tooling allows you to write C# for the iPhone and Android, so you can use them inside Visual Studio. And the final layer, the icing on the top of the cake, is MVVM Cross. MVVM Cross is the tooling that allows you to write MVVM for Android, iOS, and all the other platforms. So here are some really useful links for you. Obviously Xamarin is the first one. MVVM Cross is the second one. This allows you to, as I said, share as much of the UI code as possible. Property Cross is the website I introduced at the very start that allows you to compare different options or different toolkits for writing cross-platform applications. The fourth one is a link to my GitHub page. I've got this talk, it is labeled as a DDD talk, which is a community event where I first presented this talk, but you can go there and you can get all of the code that I've demonstrated today and a copy of the slides if you want. I do also believe there's a video being taken of this, a recording, hopefully, so you should be able to get that later on today or tomorrow morning, depending on where you live. The fifth one is a book about dependency injection using .NET. You might have noticed that that's written by Mark Seaman, who was the same person who recommended that dependency injection was a great way to have to turn down a lot of job offers. I didn't realize actually until I'd given the presentation for the first time that it was the same person that did it. And the last is a link to the Chuck Norris database if you want to use that. Okay, so I'm going to run through some questions now that people have been asking. If you've got any more, feel free to ask them away, and I will answer them as they come in. So the first question is, what's my opinion about Telerik announcing the Telerik platform? It really depends on what your use case is. Personally, I think the person has asked, is mobile plus Azure? That seems the way to go. It completely depends on your use case. There are a lot of different people in the space now that are coming up with options. I like mobile and Azure. I think that the Azure offering is very, very good. You can do things like you've got your database there, you've got push notifications if you want it. So personally, I would be sticking with the mobile and Azure option. But Telerik do some great products, so it's worth investigating that and seeing which one fits best with your sort of environment. Let me just mark that one as done. Right, so yes, so somebody's pointed out, when I was mentioning dependency injection, I mentioned that you get a lot of bloated constructors, and they've suggested that you can actually inject properties in. They've called it setter injection. I've heard it more as properties being injected. Personally, I'm not a fan of this. I prefer using constructor injection, and the reason being is that you actually in your object does have a dependency on that thing that you need, that service or whatever it is you're injecting. So I prefer to use constructor injection. The only exception I might have to that are things like if I'm injecting in a connection string or something like that, I might do property injection for them sort of constants. I would tend to use constructor injection wherever possible. Have I had any sorry, I'll read the question out. Have you had any difficulties in using third-party packages such as Google Play services? No, Xamarin has really good support of that. It even supports things like Google Glass now, so you could be writing a cross-platform Google Glass application. I've used things like the Android sort of, I can't remember what it's called, as a legacy pack. It basically allows you to target older versions of the Android SDK using still modern features like the app bar that you've got. So no, I've not experienced any problems in that. Colin Campbell is asking what factors did you select to like MVVM cross versus another MVVM framework. There aren't actually a lot of options when it comes to Android and iOS. The only other one I'm aware of is a one which uses reactive. Is it Reactive FX or Reactive UI? That's the only other one that I'm aware of that is possible. Personally, I was far more comfortable with MVVM Cross because I've done MVVM applications before in Windows Store applications, and the MVVM Cross framework just fitted nicely with my sort of workflow. But you should certainly look at some of the other options that are out there and decide which one. If you're more used to using the reactive sort of extensions, then you may be more comfortable with that option. I can't remember what that framework was called though, but if you're interested in it, if you send me a tweet at Rostarg and I'll find it out for you and I'll get back to you on that. The next question from Jessica is there HTML5 support as well as iOS and Android, etc.? So no, there isn't. To answer your question, HTML5 would be rendered on the client and would run in the browser. There is MVC support though, really, in that you can reuse your services on the server side to generate the HTML that's going to go to the client. So, but you can't use it on the HTML. You could put it in there. So what you would tend to do is you would inject in the services that you've done into sort of the controllers on an MVC app, and then you would perhaps use web services from HTML5 to get your data that way. And you can use, there are MVVM JavaScript toolkits that you can use to do data binding in HTML5, but MVVM Cross does not support HTML5. Which database file do you recommend to use in the solution, SQLite or SQL CE? I recommend using the SQLite. Now, what I haven't shown you is in MVVM Cross, there are a lot of sort of pre-built plugins that you can use. So if I go back to my desktop and let me bring up NuGet, I can show you some of these plugins that are available. So let me go to stop this project for a minute and go to manage NuGet properties. Oh, hopefully this won't take too long. And if I type in MVVM Cross, then basically there are a list of these plugins that you can use for doing things like visibility, cross-platform visibility. As I said, the way in iPhone that you hide something is by setting it's hidden, you set to true. Whereas on other platforms, you set a visibility to different things. This basically allows you to just reuse that code. And what's supported in here is there's a SQLite plugin. Now, this is the old version. There is a new version in here. I think it's towards the back, actually. I don't know. Anyway, there is a SQLite plugin that you can use that will basically allow you to just write the code in one. There we go, Community SQLite on that plugin. You can basically write all your database code inside your portable class library, and the SQLite plugin will take care of all the platform-specific stuff for you, so you don't have to write any of that yourself. Okay, so let me switch back to the questions. Oh, where's it gone? There we go. So there's another SQLite question. Can we use SQLite with Entity Framework 6 in your solution? Do you have sample code? So Entity Framework is not... So it depends what you're asking. If you're asking, can you use SQLite with LINQ? Yes, you can. But can you use it with Entity Framework? No, you can't. Entity Framework is only really supported in Windows, the WPF application and MVC applications, full fat .NET 4.5 apps. You couldn't use Entity Framework, for example, with a store app at the minute. That may have changed very, very recently, but it certainly isn't supported in the Xamarin tooling. So yes, you can use SQLite, but no, you can't use Entity Framework 6. So there's a question here from Adam Smith. Did you create each platform-specific UI from within Visual Studio, or did you import them? I didn't show you that just because it's a little bit tedious to watch me do it. But no, I created them completely inside Visual Studio. So when I did the Hello World examples at the start, you just go File, New Project, and add them in. For Android, you can live 100% inside Visual Studio and do all your UI in there. For iOS, what I tend to do is I tend to create a storyboard file, and I'll switch to the Mac, and I'll do all the UI layout, and then I'll import the project back into Visual Studio. So you do have to use sort of Xcode to do it. Now, Xamarin are working on improving that situation. You can use something called Xamarin Studio, which is Xamarin's sort of free IDE that you can use to do storyboard editing now, which means you don't have to go into Xcode at all, really. But you still need to use a Mac for that at the minute. But that story I would expect to get better quite soon. Another percentage. Okay. Let me just bring up the next question. So how would you approach this from a web versus mobile perspective? In other words, without an app and instead as a website. So this is a question from David Haney. So this is a really good question, and unfortunately it's one that I'm going to be able to answer with it depends, really. So if you're going to use a mobile website, then you can't do things like get pictures. Technically, you can sort of an iOS, but really if you want things like for people to provide evidence that they've done something, you might want them to provide a photograph. You can't take advantage of native things like NFC scanning. And the number one thing that you can't do that affects most people is that you can't get it in the App Store, which is an utterly ridiculous reason, but actually it's what a lot of companies want. They want that presence in the App Store. So if you are going to go down that route, then obviously using the mobile website is 100% coverage of almost every mobile platform that's out there. So that's a big bonus, but you can't do any of the sort of native sort of things like using, well, you can use gyroscope with HTML5 now, but you can't do NFC. There's a few things that you can't do. If you can meet the requirements of your project using a mobile website, and it doesn't matter that you can't get it in the store, I would absolutely recommend doing that as the first approach. It's cheaper, you'll get a good experience. You've got to handle connectivity issues. You've got to think about that, although with HTML5 you can solve most of them problems. But if you can't do that, which you won't be able to for a lot of situations, then I would go for the mobile app option. So there's a question here, is there any other IOC containers that work better than others on different platforms? There are obviously a lot to choose between things like Unity and Inject and Simple IOC. It's, as you point out, very difficult to know which one works better than others. With MVVM Cross, which was the tool I was showing before, it comes with its own bundled IOC container. Generally, that'll work for most things that you're trying to do, and you will struggle to find an IOC. Like, for example, Unity won't work on iOS and Android because they haven't provided the cross-platform DLLs that would be needed for that. But that may come eventually. And it's just horses for courses, really, when it comes to IoT containers. I really like Unity, and if I was doing a Windows 8 app or a Metro app, I would use Unity personally. For the cross-platform mobile applications, I'm quite happy with the IOC that's bundled with MVVM Cross. It does the job quite nicely. And Jeff Lindenberg's asked a question here. He's asked to identify the specific resources to be injected in dependency injection. Is there a downside to specifying these in app config/web config? If so, where else would you put the specific class and configuration? So basically, there are two ways of defining the mapping between an interface and a concrete class. Well, technically there's three ways. One way is the way that I've shown you, which is to do it programmatically. So you're basically inside the, let me show you this actually, because this is quite useful. Content desktop. So you can basically define programmatically. So if you remember in the dependency injection demo that I did, let me open that project back up again. You will see that what I did with Unity is, oh, that's not a valid one, I must have moved it. Where's it gone? Can't find it. Anyway, in Unity, I basically said, map this interface to this concrete implementation. I did that for every interface and every concrete implementation. That's very explicit, and it ends up becoming very, very big and unwieldy. It's not a great way to go about it. Inside MVVM Cross, you can kind of use conventions. So what this is basically saying is that anything that ends with a service that has an interface to it, register it as a lazy singleton. So that's basically a very, very quick way of saying register all my services for dependency injection. And the final way that you can do it is you can define it in sort of like a config file, so a web config or an app.config, you can sort of define them there. Now, again, when you're defining that, you need to type them all in manually, and there isn't any kind of compile time checking that the the concrete implementation actually does implement that interface that you said it does. I don't like doing configuration that way. I would miles rather do it typing it in, having the compiler check that I've done it correctly. But it's just horses for courses. It depends on what you prefer. So been asked another question. You mentioned getting access to native native device resources from HTML5 just a moment ago. What about if we took a HTML5 based application, turned it into a native application using something like PhoneGap or Aptana? Can we then make an app interact with assets and or code written using the methods you demonstrated here? So if you're going to yes, you sort of can. So with PhoneGap and them sort of technologies, what they basically do is they wrap a HTML5 application inside a native application. And what you can do is you can call web services that basically will then proxy your call to some native code. So you can do things like you can ask for the device camera using a web service, and it will turn that request into a native code, and it can then interact with the device natively. So that's not quite what I was saying when you can use HTML5 to access native resources. HTML5 supports a lot of things like GPS and gyroscopes and all sorts of stuff like that. Orientation, you can get all of that out using normal HTML5. With PhoneGap, you wrap that into like a native, you wrap your website into a native application that runs locally. There is no service, there is no server serving up these web pages. Now, there's nothing to stop you from writing your own native sort of shims or plugs that allow your PhoneGap application to talk to a native device. And I believe you can use Xamarin to write some of them native applications and embed PhoneGap inside a Xamarin application. You would be utterly bonkers to do it, I think. You would have to have such a good reason to do that I wouldn't advise it. But you could do it. And that was the last of the questions. So unless anyone has any more questions, I think I'm about done.
Well, guys, we've got another 15 minutes here. I'm sure some more of you out there. There's still 70 odd of you left. I've got some more questions. Come on, chance for all you foreigners to bombard the pommies. Bring it on.
Yeah, please keep the questions towards mobile stuff and nothing to do with any of our past expressions. I mean, are people using Xamarin? Is this useful for people? Oh, here we go. A question here. Where can I get your slides and your Twitter? Let me reply to that publicly. So someone's asking where I can get my slides and my Twitter. My Twitter is @RossDargan, D-A-R-G-A-N. That, I don't know what I've done with that. There we go, there's an answer. And my slides are on GitHub. So let me go back a page, and there we are. Hopefully you'll see where the /talks are. All the slides and the source code is available there. There we go. Yeah, so obviously, sort of traditionally, people haven't had to worry about this sort of cross-platform aspect when designing applications. But there is absolutely no harm in writing applications using some of these techniques, even if you don't intend to do cross-platform mobile developments. I would strongly recommend writing your applications and separating them using the techniques I've shown you with portable class libraries and using interfaces and dependency injection, even if you have no intention of actually moving over to a mobile platform. It just it makes your code better, easier to maintain, and you can start doing different unit tests. So we've got a question here asking, so are there any other frameworks that can compete with Xamarin? Well, okay, so the question explicitly says, but still using C#. Still using C#, the answer is no. If you want to use C#, you have to use Xamarin. That's the only cross-platform mobile option there is at the minute. If you're not bothered about using C#, then there is a cross-platform option that's very similar called Titanium. That property cross website that I showed you gives you an example of using Titanium. It's an option, and it's still high level. Okay, so Eric's asked a question about how do you include all the different notification services. That's a really good question. So obviously we've got 6 different platforms, and sort of 4 of them support push notifications. How do you actually take advantage of them? This is where you really want to be using some of the Azure services. So the Azure mobile offering, basically what you would do is you would register the device when it first runs to receive notifications using the Azure notification services, and Azure takes care of the fact that it's an iOS app or it's an Android app or whatever. To do the actual registration process, you obviously need device-specific code. So what you could do is you could either write a plugin to do it for MVVM cross, or you could use dependency injection. You would have an interface, something called, I don't know, iDevice registration with a register method in it, and then you would create a concrete implementation for that for iOS that takes care of assigning the right IDs to the Azure mobile service. And that's how you would do that. You would basically separate out exactly the same way as I did for message box, but you do it for notification services. There's a question from Andre saying, can we run a WPF app in Linux using Xamarin? No is the answer to that. What you would do is you can use, what's it called? Is it Mononet? Let me just find out what it's called. Yeah, so basically what you can do is you can run, so Xamarin uses something called Mono, basically to do the cross-compilation. And there is a version, there's something called Mono Project that lets you run C# applications, but on Linux and on Macs and things like that. You wouldn't write a WPF application, you would write a Linux mono application. So the same way that I wrote a store app and a WPF app and an iOS app and a W48 app, there would be another one that was for mono. Now, MVVM Cross wouldn't support that, so you wouldn't be able to do any of the UI data binding that I showed, but you could still do things like share your services and share all of the logic for your business logic. You could still share all that code using mono. So I see is asking, how is the tooling experience? That's a really good question, and the answer is, it's varied. So when I initially started doing Xamarin and stuff, I found it to be painful. And since they rebranded themselves as Xamarin, it became significantly better. But every so often you'll run a build, like basically the Xamarin tooling has a stable build, an alpha build, and a beta build. And you tend to find that the alpha build is normally got some bugs in it. So you try to avoid that, which is what you would expect for an alpha build. But every so often the alpha build will be more stable than the stable build, and it can get a little bit hectic. Basically, the tooling is normally quite good. Sometimes they've got quite restrictive licensing in there, and you'll get a licensing issue. But the support team are really great at sorting that out. So overall, the tooling is far better than having to do 3 different native application developments. It's better to be in Visual Studio using the Xamarin tooling. That's not to say it's not without issues. So Philip has asked a question, is it possible to do cross-platform using Xamarin.iOS on a Mac? Or is the more expensive Visual Studio Xamarin license required? Would you use portable class libraries or just file links? So, the Xamarin license that I showed you is the license that allows you to use Visual Studio. There is a cheaper indie license that allows you just to use the Xamarin Studio product, which is like Visual Studio, just you can't use things like ReSharp and stuff like that. Absolutely, you can do Xamarin.iOS on a Mac. It does it support portable class libraries? I am honestly not sure whether it does. In fact, I don't think it does, so you might need to use file links. It definitely supports file links, but I'm not convinced that it supports portable class libraries yet. Again, I would expect that to come if it doesn't. But Philip, if you want to know for sure, if you give me some contact details for you, just update the question, I'll keep it private. I will get back to you with an absolute answer for that, because I'm not honestly sure. So, I think that is all of the questions, unless anyone's got any more. Oh, there we go. So Andrea's asked, what options do you have to make apps like WPF in Linux? QuickQt, JavaFX, or anything else? I'm honestly not sure. I don't use Linux terribly often, and I'm not sure what you mean by asking what options do you have to make apps like WPF. Do you mean what options do you have to make sort of form-based applications, big fat client applications, or do you mean like WPF when you kind of are using like XAML to lay out code? You'd have to expand a little bit on that question. If you're asking what options do you have to make, okay, so it's saying WPF uses DirectX, which technology uses OpenGL and Linux. Okay, I honestly don't know, Andrew, I'm sorry.
I think I can probably help you there, Ross. Just for the record, if that's the Andre I think it is, Andre is also a long-time supporter of LIDNUG. He's one of our most prominent members. Basically, if you're asking what I think you're asking, Andre, WPF uses DirectX for its hardware acceleration and its vector-based UI design. Now, under Linux, there was a project called Moonlight that was headed off by Novell, I think it was, that was basically an open source implementation of WPF. However, I believe that Novell dropped it quite some time ago and it never made it beyond version 3.
Peter, I think Moonlight was a Silverlight implementation using Mono. So Novell originally did Mono. They sort of contributed to it and they did a lot to it. And that's where the Mono Touch project and all of the precursors to Xamarin came out of. Novell dropped Mono completely, and the Xamarin guys sort of bought it out from them. So Moonlight was a Silverlight implementation that got dropped. So yeah, there isn't really an option there now.
Now, that said, just before you move on to the next question, I do know that the latest GNOME desktop bindings in Mono, however, do have some hardware acceleration in, but I don't know to what extent. You'll need to look that one up.
Okay, so there's a question asking, for what type of project would you use Mono FW, which I'm guessing means framework? Any at all? Is it dead end at this time? Any progress on Xamarin in this direction currently? So Xamarin haven't announced anything about using Mono at all for sort of other platforms. So I'm not sure. They might be doing stuff behind the scenes. They certainly work on a lot of cool stuff behind the scenes that they don't let people know about, so it's possible. And is Mono a dead end at this time? No, I don't think so. I think it's an open source stream that's been run in parallel now by the community. So I don't think it's a dead end. But I don't know how well supported it is.
I believe it is. I believe it's still quite active, actually.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's still been done, but I tend to stick to the mobile stuff, so I couldn't give you any firm answers on that, I'm afraid. But certainly if you go to mono-project.com, they've got quite a bit of information on there. Might be worth heading to there.
Just Sam, if you actually post a discussion in the LIDNUG discussion group, with that in, come and start a discussion. I know there's quite a few people in the group that are heavily into Mono, so come in and start a discussion and we'll all jump in and we'll see what we can contribute towards that.
Okay, does anybody else have any more questions?
Nope, I think we're quiet there, Ross.
I think so.
I don't think we've got any more.
Oh, no, maybe not.
Yeah, rather than put your hand up, can you type your question, please? Because we don't really have the capacity to handle ones where you put your hand up. If you're struggling and you want to ask a question and you have a microphone, excuse me, we have a couple of minutes left, so we can maybe take a couple of open mic calls.
Yep.
We don't normally.
Well, I'm a laid-back kind of guy. That's fine by me.
No takers. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do then. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Ross. That was enlightening, and I'll be honest with you, I actually picked up a few things there that I missed when you did it at DDD North as well. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Hopefully you'll come back and do another one for us again sometime. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. You know.
No, it's been interesting. It's very novel not having an audience that you can sort of interact with.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? But yeah, thank you once again, and hope to see you back again soon.